bombshell new lawsuit that involves Sean Diddy Combs, but isn't against the disgraced music mogul. As Diddy is listening to closing arguments in his sex trafficking and racketeering trial in federal court in New York, his son, Justin, has been hit with a lawsuit by a woman who claims that he lured her to Los Angeles to be raped by multiple men, including his dad, Sean Diddy Combs.
Everything started spiraling the moment that lawsuit hit the public. 1 second, the empire looked untouchable, unstoppable, solid as steel. The next second, everything cracked open like a rotten floorboard giving way under its own weight.
How about the timing of this new lawsuit involving the son of Sean Diddy Combs? It was just in the hours after the government on Thursday finished their closing arguments in the case against the disgraced music mogul that we learned about this new lawsuit against Sean Combs' son, Justin. Justin is one of Diddy's 7 kids. Here he is with his dad's arm around his shoulder. Justin has been in court supporting his dad just as his siblings have been over the past 7 weeks of testimony. Now, listen, whatever your feelings are on Sean Combs and whether you think he's guilty of the charges that could put him in federal prison for the rest of his life, you just have to think how difficult it must be to hear about all the sexual exploits of their father. But if you believe the allegations I'm about to tell you in this new lawsuit brought against Justin Combs, Justin apparently was very aware of his dad's lifestyle. The new lawsuit that just dropped was filed by a woman from Louisiana who says in 2017, Justin Combs coaxed her to come to LA because she says that Diddy's son promised her a job in the entertainment industry. She claims the two had met on Snapchat, and Justin allegedly asked for explicit pictures, and she sent them. The woman, who's not named in this suit, says when she got to LA, she was raped by several men, including a certain music mogul now at the center of this high-profile, historic trial in federal court in Lower Manhattan. Yes, Sean Diddy Combs. The alleged victim claims that Justin invited her out west for a weekend to talk about her career. But when she got there, she says she was kept in a house in Beverly Hills. And according to the lawsuit, things seemed fine at first, but when she allegedly asked Justin Combs if they were going to leave the house, he said no. She claims that Justin Combs offered her alcohol, pills, and weed, and she thinks that the weed was laced. Now, you can see in those allegations some of the comparisons in this lawsuit to the so-called freak-offs that we have been hearing about for weeks at the center of the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. The woman says after she took the drugs, 3 men entered the house and all of them were wearing masks. Now, it's unclear what kind of masks the men were wearing, but when I read that part, I thought about the testimony of Sheree Hayes in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, the escort known as the Punisher. He testified that during a freak-off, Sean Combs allegedly wore a face covering that he likened to a Muslim hijab. In the lawsuit against Justin Combs, the alleged victim says that she knew that one of the men was Diddy just because of his mannerisms, but how about this? She also knew it was Diddy because she says that Justin, as his dad entered the home to allegedly rape a woman that he brought to LA, called Diddy, quote, Pops. Now, we see on Justin's social media that Pops is the phrase that he often uses for his dad. In this lawsuit, the alleged victim claims that she was led to a bedroom where she was allegedly told, quote, you better let this happen or else. Then she says that each man took a turn raping her, calling it a, quote, brutal gang rape. After that, she was taken to an airport on Monday and flown home. Not only is Diddy facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison if convicted of all the charges in his sex trafficking and racketeering trial, there have been nearly 80 lawsuits filed against him in civil court. Many are still active. Several of the lawsuits accuse Diddy of sexual abuse and are filed by people who are not giving their names, just like in this lawsuit that we're talking about. This also isn't the first lawsuit that Justin Combs has recently faced. Justin was named in a suit brought by music producer Rodney Jones, who goes by Little Rod. Rod claims that Diddy coerced him into sexual acts, and you can see the suit also names Justin Combs and accused Justin of covering up a shooting in 2022 at Little Rod's studio in LA with his dad. In May, a judge did dismiss.
And the wildest part? It wasn't just the empire itself being dragged in, it was the entire family line. The father, the sons. The whole machine that spent years polishing its image like a diamond suddenly found itself exposed to the world, raw, unfiltered, and unprotected. This wasn't some small claim. This wasn't someone looking for attention. This wasn't some petty fight over money or contracts. This was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit packed with details, The kind of details that make people step back and ask themselves whether they ever actually knew who these people were. The accusations weren't vague, they weren't half-formed, they were laid out piece by piece, incident by incident, year by year, turning what used to be rumors and whispers into something solid enough to shake an entire industry. And the moment people started reading through the documents, everything changed. You could practically feel the energy online shift. One minute people were celebrating the success and influence of this powerful figure, and the next minute they were dissecting every piece of the lawsuit, every claim, every timeline, every disturbing allegation. People went from admiration.
Justin from Little Rod's lawsuit, so he is no longer facing those allegations. As for the lawsuit filed in the hours before his dad's attorneys were to make closing arguments, E! News reports that Diddy's attorneys have denied the allegations, but it's unclear what Justin's response is at the time of this recording. Joining us now is criminal defense attorney Will Corman. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us. What stands out to you in this lawsuit that Sean Combs is named, but also his son Justin?
Well, it's interesting. I think the connection to Sean Combs is pretty tenuous. You know, we've gone through this all. It almost seems the one connection to Sean Combs that they actually put on him is the allegation that Justin called one of the masked men Pops during the course of the assault or just before the assault. That's it. The other connection, obviously, is that Sean Combs is Justin Combs' dad. So I think it's a bit of a stretch. Again, we're just receiving these documents now. We're just going through this lawsuit now. Perhaps there's more out there, but it really doesn't seem that way.
And of course, people who are victims of sexual violence, you want them to get their justice. We have seen dozens of lawsuits filed against Justin's dad in the wake of when he was indicted for the trial that he's on right now. How do you go through these lawsuits and understand who's telling the truth and who actually has a case that could be heard in court? Someone like Cassie Ventura, when you see that video from 2016, or you do look at some of these Jane Doe lawsuits and you wonder how many of them are true.
Look, as a criminal defense attorney, it's my job to be cynical, and it's my job to, review everything with a pretty jaundiced eye. So the question really becomes are there corroborating facts and circumstances from Jump Street that make sense? So for example, if this lawsuit is alleging that something happened in LA during a specific period of time, do we know that Sean Combs was there? Do we actually know that he was present in LA? These things aren't difficult to find out, but it's those baby steps to trying to build the foundation of a lawsuit to see what's realistic that really matter in a case like this. And as you so correctly said, we want victims of domestic violence, of sexual violence, and so on and so forth to actually be compensated accordingly. Unfortunately, when we have circumstances where we have somebody famous who's been charged with crimes, we have somebody famous who's been sued, there can be instances where other folks jump on the bandwagon. And I'm not suggesting that's what's happening here, but it is something that everyone needs to look at skeptically.
Right, absolutely. If you were to bring a lawsuit against someone like Justin Combs, or any of these, and even the cases involving his dad, and you're bringing a civil suit, what facts do you need to have? I mean, certainly if you have a victim who says that this happened and they're ready to, they're able to provide some corroborating evidence that something happened, what do you actually need to be able to go to the courthouse and say, I'm filing a lawsuit against this person?
I think that you need to have somebody who's willing to state under oath that this is what happened to me, that this is what I'm alleging, these are my damages, this is how it's impacted me. And as an attorney, again, I would want to make sure, especially in a lawsuit like this, where it involves a high-profile person, but quite frankly, in any lawsuit, that there is some corroborating information out there so that my lawsuit isn't tossed out of court pretty quickly.
And reading through this complaint, it mentions several other
to shock in seconds. The comments, the reactions, the outrage, it all exploded instantly. What really sent shockwaves wasn't just the father being at the center of it all, it was the sons being pulled into it right alongside him. The lawsuit didn't treat them like innocent bystanders. It didn't treat them like clueless kids caught in the crossfire. It treated them like active participants in an environment that was darker than anyone expected. And the language used, cold, clinical, specific, left no room for misunderstanding. It made it sound like the empire wasn't just corrupt from the top, but from every direction, every layer, Every generation. People had spent years defending the family, saying they were misunderstood, saying the rumors were exaggerated, saying that everyone was jealous of their success. But now, those defenders vanished, quiet, silent, gone, because the lawsuit wasn't something you could excuse. It wasn't something you could ignore. It wasn't something you could brush off as hate. It was detailed enough to make even the family's strongest supporters question everything. And the timing couldn't have been worse for them.
Their lawsuits. You have the lawsuit from Rodney Jones, who's known as Little Rod, and Sean Combs is facing that lawsuit, and his son was named in it, but has since been dropped. What do you make about it having all these other different cases and elements brought in? What is the attorney here trying to prove?
Well, it almost appears as if the attorney is saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. So here are all these other lawsuits, and I've reviewed the complaint, and they talk about them in some detail. They don't just list them. They say, this happened on this date, and this person sued Sean Combs here, and this person sued Sean Combs here for this set of facts and circumstances. And they're essentially trying to say, because there's all these other lawsuits, you should give this one a stamp of approval, because again, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Tony Buzbee, his law firm is bringing this. He has been in the civil world a very, very prominent name. For those who don't know him, and you work in criminal defense, what do you know about Tony Buzbee? Knowing that it's his law firm bringing this, what does that tell you?
I don't think that the Buzbee law firm is taking these allegations lightly. I believe they have the resources to do their own investigations prior to actually filing these suits. So this isn't some, sole practitioner who's trying to jump on the cottage industry that's been created around suing Sean Combs. I think that they have the ability to investigate this. They have the ability to decide whether or not they want to take on these cases. And I think that does lend some credibility, albeit, not a ton, but I think it does lend some credibility to the facts and circumstances surrounding it. In other words, this alleged victim didn't just walk in off the street to some random law firm who then is saying, oh, we now have the ability to sue Sean Combs. This is someone who's been down this well-trod path before and probably knows exactly what the pitfalls are in suing somebody as prominent as Sean Combs.
This lawsuit came down at the time we were recording this, came down last night. So that was a couple hours after the government finished their closing arguments against Sean Combs. And as we're recording this right now, Sean Combs, his defense team is giving his closing argument. What do you make about the timing of this? It's against Justin Combs and Sean Combs' name, but it's happening right in the middle of maybe the most pivotal part of this entire trial.
I don't exactly know what to make of the timing of it. I think it's interesting. I think that I'm a little surprised that it's come out so late, but sometimes we don't know what led the alleged victim in this lawsuit to break their silence and to file this lawsuit. Perhaps they were watching the testimony or reviewing the testimony in the criminal case and said, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened to me. Perhaps they said, they listened to the testimony and they said, there are so many victims here. I believe that I am one too. We don't know what prompted it. I think the timing is interesting, but I don't know that I can make anything of it as we sit here right now.
I think of recently you had Tyler Perry, prominent name in Hollywood, very different case, but accused of sexual violence and sexual harassment, workplace harassment with an actor who had worked on one of his shows, and the actor provided text messages in the complaint. This doesn't have that. Very different case. But the fact that there's not that visual evidence that we can look at, and I don't know what type of visual evidence would exist in a case like this, but the fact that we don't particularly have those, does that take away from the weight of what
the empire was already wobbling? There were already cracks forming, small stories slipping out, inconsistent behavior, old footage resurfacing, insiders whispering, but everyone assumed it would blow over like everything else, that the empire would handle it, spin it, bury it, move on. But this wasn't something they could bury. This was something that dug itself deep into the core of their entire legacy. The lawsuit hit with the force of a meteor, and once it landed, the fallout began immediately. Associates who once bragged about knowing the family suddenly started distancing themselves. Old friends stopped returning calls. People who once claimed loyalty started unfollowing, blocking, deleting photos, deleting posts. It was like watching rats flee a sinking ship. Everyone knew the storm was coming, and nobody wanted to be the one left holding the debris. And inside the empire, panic. Real panic. You could feel it even if they weren't saying it publicly. The silence was too sharp, too rehearsed, too unnatural. It was the kind of silence people use when they're
This lawsuit may actually be in the end when it comes to the truth.
Well, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, because
Sure.
the filing of a complaint is just simply the first step, and all the complaint needs to do, on paper anyway, is set forth the factual allegations, that are enough to sort of not get the case thrown out at the first few stages, and that bar is pretty low. So there may be tons of evidence surrounding these allegations that aren't in the lawsuit. They don't need to be in the lawsuit. Again, there needs to be just enough to get us through those first few steps. Excuse me.
As Sean Combs, we're awaiting, once the jury gets the case next week, and then we'll see what the verdict is. But guilty or not guilty, he's going to be dealing with a lot of civil cases that are still pending. What does the timeline look like for Sean Combs? Let's just say he's found not guilty of everything. What does the legal timeline look for him? How long could he be dealing with the issues related to all these civil suits?
That's a great question. First of all, I don't think he's going to be found not guilty of everything. So that's a separate issue entirely.
Yeah.
Having said that, again, different jurisdictions have different statutes of limitations for sex assault victims to bring lawsuits within which, or timelines within which they can bring the lawsuits. And so again, depending on where allegations come from, those statutes of limitations can be very long. It also matters on how old the alleged victim was at the time that the incident took place. For example, there have been a number of states which have extended statutes of limitations for minors who were sexually assaulted. Those statutes of limitations are much longer than for adults who've been sexually assaulted. So it really does depend. And I know that's not quite answering the question, but I suppose the easiest answer is it could go on for quite some time.
And you look at this complaint, the complaint is for sexual assault and battery, gender violence, negligent supervision. I think a lot of people would look at this and they'd certainly, if all of this is true, what a horrific experience that this victim went through. Why is this not a criminal case?
That's a great question. And I suppose that this victim could have brought this to the county attorney's office or whatever local prosecutorial body there are. We don't know the answer to that. Perhaps quite frankly, we simply don't know the answer to that. But it's also important to remember this, that Sean Combs is named in this lawsuit. I have reviewed this lawsuit. The connection to Sean Combs is pretty thin from a legal standpoint. It just is. So we don't know why this wasn't brought forth criminally. Perhaps the person decided they would rather seek their own form of justice from a civil standpoint. Sean Combs has a lot going on criminally right now, and perhaps it wouldn't even be prosecuted. Again, if he's found guilty of all these offenses in federal court in New York, Sean Combs is going to prison for decades. He's 55 years old, not that old, but he's still going to prison for a very long time. So I don't know that the LA District Attorney's Office or whatever prosecutorial body is out there would bother pursuing criminal charges if Sean Combs at age 55 just gets a 30-year sentence federal.
And for Justin Combs, and I assume he'll have, I don't know if he has a trust or an inheritance or how he financially makes a living. Certainly it's part of being in the circle of Sean Combs. How does he pay for an attorney? Is that have to come from
trying not to drown? And the legal team? They were scrambling, rushing to release statements, rushing to deny claims, rushing to control the narrative. But no matter how hard they pushed, the lawsuit drowned everything out. It was too heavy, too detailed, too damning. People started revisiting old interviews, old footage, old behind-the-scenes clips. What once looked harmless now looked suspicious. What once looked playful now looked calculated. What once looked like a close family now looked like a tightly controlled hierarchy where everyone knew their place and stayed in line. The sons, who were once seen as carefree heirs to a fortune, were now being seen under an entirely different light. Every smirk, every moment of arrogance, every time they flashed wealth in front of cameras, now people wondered if that confidence came from the empire itself or from something darker beneath the surface. And what made the situation even worse was how quickly more people started coming forward. Once the lawsuit opened the floodgates, the trickle became a stream. Former workers hinted at strange experiences.
If you're proving something like this, obviously, you're going to rely on the testimony of witnesses. It could be independent witness, because the sex workers, even though they're participants in a sex act, they won't necessarily be charged, or I don't think they're going to be defendants in the lawsuit if the allegation is that they were forced to perform these sex acts and it wasn't just a commercial transaction. So you can rely on that testimony. Obviously, Lil Rod himself, but he's a plaintiff, so his testimony may be biased, may be true, but it's certainly something that you would want more of if you are a prosecutor. And then you look to video and you look to other types of evidence, maybe text messages, something that corroborates what Lil Rod has said. And of course, if you have someone like Horam who flips, that would be very, very helpful for prosecutors, because we know that former employees, they usually have a lot of information and they can be leveraged in a criminal case or even a civil one to cooperate to save themselves.
I want to talk more about that, the flipping of all of this, because right now Diddy is the only one who has been charged federally in relation to this scheme, this alleged scheme. But as you pointed out, there are other people who have been identified as participants in all this. Christina Coram obviously is the main one, along with the Combs enterprise or empire, whatever you want to call it. She has not yet been charged, but I'm pretty sure, as you've told me in the past, probably this interview and many others, the feds are going to be talking to Christina Coram, and it would be in her best interest likely to cooperate with them. But what about Justin and Christian? I mean, they're so close to Diddy. They're his sons, and they have accusations against them. They could, as you said, face these charges in the future. What do you think? Do you think that they would flip?
I think it's a lot less likely that Justin and Christian would flip. I've seen children testify against their parents. We've seen it on Law and Crime many times, and obviously it makes for great drama and courtroom theatrics. But I think in a case like this, it's going to be less likely. They really owe everything to their father, right? He's obviously someone with significant financial means. He's someone that's going to pay for their lawyers and protect them. I think it would be pretty surprising to see a flip like that. Of course, anything's possible, but I think it's less likely, given that there are people that really don't have that familial tie. They don't have their legacy. They don't have potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to lose if they end up turning sideways on their parents. So it's obviously a possibility. I think it's highly unlikely, especially what we saw during that first hearing. The children all being in court, directly supporting Combs, him waving and blowing kisses to them. I think a flip is unlikely with respect to Justin and Christian.
Yeah, what do you make of that? Obviously, they're supporting their father, as you've discussed. They were actually in the courtroom supporting him, as you said, blowing kisses, all of that. But then there's also headlines, photos, videos of Christian Combs, who's been out partying after all this. People are obviously clamoring at any sort of Diddy news. But do these two have to kind of keep in mind that the focus is going to be on them? They are being watched, I mean, in relation to what their dad was doing, but also their allegations against them. I mean, is this something they should be keeping in mind, their public image?
I do, Sierra, and it's not just about the courtroom. We've talked about the court of public opinion in a case like this, and the jurors are ordinary people, and everyone knows who Sean Diddy Combs is. And if there's this sort of very high-profile criminal trial happening in May or sometime in 2025, and the perception is that the family doesn't take this seriously, they're partying, they're drinking, it really plays into some of the allegations that this was just a party lifestyle, and these individuals thought that they were above the law. Now, again, I'm not saying that jurors don't follow the instructions in the law, and they're really supposed to decide the case solely based on the facts and evidence.
Former friends hinted at toxic environments. Former partners hinted at manipulation. Everyone who ever had a story suddenly felt like this was the moment to speak. And with the lawsuit as the catalyst, everything started stacking up, one claim on top of another, painting a picture that was impossible to ignore. The lawsuit didn't just ask for money, it demanded accountability. It accused the family of creating an environment where excess, intimidation, manipulation, and control were normalized. And when you looked at the timeline, when you connected the dots, when you read between the lines, you realized this wasn't about one moment. This was about years. Years of behavior, years of power left unchecked, years of people tiptoeing around a figure who believed he could do anything without ever facing consequences. The sons, the lawsuit made it clear they weren't children anymore. They were grown adults playing grown adult roles in an environment built on secrecy. And as the lawsuit spread, people started realizing how deep the influence went. These weren't just kids growing up around luxury. These were individuals shaped by the rules of the
evidence in the case, but we've seen it time and time again. It could be Johnny Depp, it could be Michael Jackson. Whenever you have someone who's high profile and the narrative, the public perception, the PR really machine goes in one way, it can really help shape the opinions in the courtroom as well.
So we've talked about these sexual assault allegations that are against both Justin and Christian. But there's another incident that's pointed out in Lil Rod's civil suit. And this is in regards to Justin. I just want to touch on this one quick. That apparently there was a shooting at one of Diddy's recording studios years ago. And that Justin and Diddy apparently covered this up. Somebody was obviously shot and injured in this incident. There were reports on it, but not in relation to either of those two. Is this something that the feds would pursue? I mean, I know that the main part of the case is these sexual assault allegations, but could they head down that road toward attempted murder with a gunshot wound?
Potentially, and I've gotten this question a lot with respect to obviously the killing of Tupac, both in 1996 and the attempted murder in 1994. And a lot of people, I'm sure, watching believe that Combs, had something to do with that. I think it's challenging because then you start going in a very different direction, a rabbit hole. You're charging something that may be more difficult to prove, involving a shooting. You don't necessarily have the victim who's there testifying. And, what I've seen from U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, and not just this case, and others as well, for instance, how he's handling the New York Mayor Eric Adams case, he is really keeping the surgical, he's keeping the charges narrow. That's why we're not seeing a kitchen sink approach. And sometimes we see that from prosecutors, for instance, in the Young Thug YSL case, everyone is being charged, right? Lots of different defendants, lots of different charges going, spanning over years. I don't think that's something that we're going to see here. I can't see that this prosecutor is going to charge things that aren't very easy to prove because of that. Then you start creating potential doubt, even though these are very serious allegations, obviously murder, attempted murder. We're talking about Tupac probably being the greatest rapper of our lifetime. I don't think this is something that we're going to see added to the charges in this case because I think this specific prosecutor wants to keep things very narrow and very surgical.
So unclear about all this, whether any charges, if and when, they could be added. But if we're talking about the defense now, switching to their side of things, I'm sure obviously they're talking to Diddy, but I'm wondering about their conversations with Christian and Justin. Do you think that the defense attorneys, their team, would be reaching out to both of them to talk and kind of bulk up Diddy's side of the case?
Sure. I'm sure that anyone who's a witness, whether it's a family member or someone else who was there, really needs a lawyer because they may get subpoenaed. They may have to testify at trial or before the grand jury. Now, of course, everyone has the right to remain silent and they can invoke if there's any criminal liability. But ultimately, everyone's going to need their own lawyers because there's a potential conflict. Obviously, Combs and Christian, they have financial means. They're going to have their own lawyers. But no question, whether it's a family member, whether it's a celebrity, whether it's someone who was a witness, just happened to be there, there's the possibility that they're contacted by law enforcement, HSI, and other federal agents. So they should have a lawyer and they need to make a decision whether they're going to remain silent, cooperate, or do something else.
And now it's important to know that all three of these people we're talking about today, Diddy, Justin Combs, Christian Combs, have denied all of these allegations against them. So that's important to talk about. But also, we do still have that civil suit specifically against Christian Combs here. But where does all of that land now? That we have Diddy, who's been indicted federally, he's facing these charges, but the civil suits, are they now kind of taking a back seat?
That's absolutely right, Sierra. What's going to happen is they're going to be stayed.
And now those rules were being exposed in the harshest way possible. The public reaction only intensified. Some people said burn it all down. Some said the family should have been stopped years ago. Some said they always felt something was off. And others just stared in disbelief, replaying all the glamorous moments they once admired and realizing that behind every smile might have been something much darker. As soon as people started reading the documents, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The accusations weren't just shocking, they were disturbing. They forced the public to rethink everything they thought they knew. The family had built its brand on wealth, status, and dominance. Now it was being torn down with claims that made even their harshest critics sit in silence. The empire always looked too big to fall, too powerful, too deeply connected. And what's really crazy is that this lawsuit might not even be the end. Usually, when one person steps forward, others follow. Usually, when one lawsuit gains traction, more lawsuits line up right behind it. And with the amount of noise this one created, it's almost guaranteed that more storm clouds are gathering, ready to break open. Inside the empire, chaos is brewing. The father, once seen as invincible, is now cornered. The sons, once seen as untouchable heirs, are now tied into allegations that could follow them for the rest of their lives. The legacy, the brand, the image they curated so carefully, is now covered in shadows. And the world is watching every second of it. Watching the empire crumble. Watching the family panic. Watching the truth peel back layer by layer. Nobody ever thought this family would face consequences. Nobody thought the machine could ever be stopped. But the lawsuit changed everything. And whether the claims are proven or not, the damage is already done. Reputation shattered. Alliances broken. Trust destroyed. The empire is shaking. And the foundation that once seemed unbreakable is now cracking in slow motion. People are asking how far this goes. How much more will come out? Who else was involved? And the more people ask, the more the empire trembles. Because once the truth starts leaking, it doesn't stop. And for this family, the leaks are turning into a flood that might drown everything they ever built.